I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Presidency. Today, we are going to be talking about George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States of America. We will be discussing a few of his roles as president, such as chief party leader, chief executive, and commander-in-chief. In the end, we'll have a brief panel discussion with historians about the extent to which he was an imperial president. Enjoy.
The chief party leader is the most powerful official within a political party. They speak to their political party and represent them. The party leader is typically responsible for managing the party's relationship with the general public. As such, he or she will take a leading role in developing and communicating party policy, especially election platforms, to the electorate. The party leader is also typically the public face of the party and the principal media contact.
Presidents routinely work more closely with members of their own party in Congress than they do with members of the opposite party. They also work to support members of their party in Congress during congressional elections by showing up at campaign rallies and fundraisers.
For presidents to succeed in the American political system, they recognize the need to gain support from the members of their party. Presidents generally have a harder time getting their policies enacted if they don't have good working relationships with the same members of their parties in Congress.
Bush attempted to create a positive campaign in 2000 with slogans like "A New Day" and "A Fresh Start for America." His role as compassionate conservative won him support from the Bible Belt and the right-wing Christians in America, who many believe won him the election.
Bush campaigned across the country with the goals of strengthening Social Security, cutting taxes and making the system fairer, improving education, providing quality health care for every family, and creating a stronger military. He was especially known for his "A Bold Tax Cut" plan to lower all tax rates for all taxpayers. Bush was also concerned about America's needy families.
To many people's surprise, Bush picked Dick Cheney as his running mate to be vice president. He was a former White House chief of staff, U.S. representative, and Secretary of Defense.
Bush wanted to let people put their Social Security money into private savings accounts, which his opponent, Al Gore, opposed, creating a position issue.
You can't win a political race without money, and lots of it.
There are rules in place to ensure that money spent in campaigning is done so in a lawful way. For instance, individuals can't give more than $2,000 to any candidate in any election, and political action committees may not contribute more than $5,000 per candidate per election or $15,000 to a national political party. Bush received contributions from many companies' PACs, with top contributors of Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and UBS AG. Bush's 2004 opponent, John Kerry, raised $40,000 less than he, while both received $74.6 million in government funding for the general election. When President Bush ran against Senator John Kerry, both raised a total of nearly $500 million in private contributions during the presidential primary season. They did so under increased contribution limits mandated by the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Total contributions to presidential candidates jumped from $528 million in 2000 to more than $880 million in 2004, a massive increase. While campaigning, Bush promised to reverse the trend of uninsured Americans by making health insurance affordable for low-income families. During the first 2 years of his presidency, though, the number of uninsured Americans actually increased by 4 million. He also campaigned on the platform that he would pay the debt down to a historically low level, all the while creating a record-high national debt. Not all his promises were kept, but the actions Bush took served to characterize him as chief party leader at the time.
The president also serves as a chief executive, meaning that they can make appointments to White House offices, executive office, and the cabinet. The president can appoint people with federal experience and expertise in the fields, not necessarily on political ideology. However, the president only gets to appoint a few hundred people at top, and there are thousands underneath him that he has no control over hiring.
Some of President Bush's appointments were the first to happen ever in history. For instance, he appointed Colin Powell as an African American to the Secretary of State position, but after Powell, he also appointed Condoleezza Rice, an African American woman, to the same position.
One of the president's most important jobs in relation to being chief executive is that he has the power to issue executive orders, meaning that he has the power to create and impose laws on the American people without congressional approval.
Executive orders are official documents numbered consecutively through which the president manages the operations of the federal government. U.S. presidents have issued executive orders since 1789, usually to help officers and agencies of the executive branch manage the operations within federal government itself. This means that executive orders have had the full force of the law since then. While there is no constitutional provision that explicitly states the allowance of executive orders, there is a vague grant of executive power given in Article 2, Section 1, Clause of the Constitution. This is furthered by the declaration to take care of the laws be faithfully executed made in Article 2, Section 3, Clause 5. Most executive orders use these constitutional reasonings as authorization for their executive orders. Checks on these executive orders are important. The executive order must have constitutional statutory basis, and the next president can take them back. Congress can also pass a law nullifying it, and it can be challenged in court.
George W. Bush issued a total of 291 executive orders during his presidency. The first one was Executive Order 13198, issued on January 29, 2001. This executive order dealt with agency responsibilities with respect to faith-based and community initiatives.
The text of executive orders appears in the Daily Federal Register, as each executive order is signed by the President and received by the Office of Federal Register. The known text of executive order begins with Executive Order 7316 of March 13, 1936.
Basically, anyone can see the text of the executive order because they're made public to the American people.
It's also extremely easy to track how many executive orders per year each president has issued. Looking at Bush's presidency, we can track how many executive orders he has issued. Beginning in 2001, Bush ordered 54 total executive orders. In 2002, that number fell to only 31 executive orders, and then rising again in 2003 with 41 executive orders. In 2004, he issued 45 executive orders. In 2005, he issued 26 orders, increasing the number by 1 in 2007 with 27 executive orders. In 2007, Bush issued 32 executive orders. In 2008, he issued 30, and closed his presidency in 2009 with a mere 5 executive orders.
In the beginning of Bush's presidency, as it is with any president, it was difficult to gauge how much Bush would use the power of executive order. In December 2001, however, the sentiment was that Bush was busy writing one law after another without the legislative branch. However, presidents are simply lawmakers by design, and rarely are their efforts ever called into question. They issue directives that have the status of laws. It is one of the many tools that they are given.
There are certainly critics of this executive order system. Critics have accused presidents of abusing their executive powers, using them to move existing laws away from their original mandates, and using them to make new laws without congressional approval.
An example of an extreme executive order was 9066 under FDR, which called for Japanese internment camps during World War II.
Bush's orders also had their share of controversy. After 9/11, Bush secretly signed 2 executive orders that people argued breached the Constitution. The first one grants the President and other officials like the Secretary of Defense the right to declare anyone, even an American citizen, an unlawful enemy combatant. A person with this title has no way to redress or appeal that designation. Once a person has been named an enemy combatant, he has no rights. From this stems great uprising among the American people. Staging protests, making their own YouTube videos, people wanted their voices to be heard.
Claimed the authority to hold him indefinitely, without trial, without a lawyer, without charges, for the duration of the war on terror.
We have lived as people in fear. And now, our rights and our freedoms in peril, we slowly awaken to learn that we have been afraid of the wrong thing. May now, if he so decides, declare you an unlawful enemy combatant and ship you somewhere, anywhere. And if you think this hyperbole or hysteria, ask the newspaper editors when John Adams was president, or the pacifists when Woodrow Wilson was president, or the Japanese at Manzanar when Franklin Roosevelt.
Kennedy calling this seriously flawed. Senator Patrick Leahy saying it's, quote, a sad day when the rubber stamp Congress undercuts our freedoms. And Senator Russ Feingold adding that we will look back on this day as a stain on our nation's history.
Constitutional couch potatoes. I mean, the Congress just gave the president despotic powers. And you could hear the yawn across the country as people turned to, Dancing with the Stars. I mean, it's otherworldly.
However, U.S. courts have only overturned 2 executive orders in history. The Truman Order, which included integration of the armed forces, and a 1995 order issued by Clinton that tried to prevent the federal government from contracting with the organizations that had strikebreakers on the payroll.
Bush also blocked stem cell research, limiting their funding with Executive Order 13435. 5 years later, he used the first veto of his presidency to reject legislation served by a Republican Congress in order to ease up on his tensions of his policy.
Through Executive Order 13292, Bush amended Clinton's order, which made it easier to declassify documents. It also gave the Vice President the same power that the President has to classify documents.
Bush also issued many executive orders concerning Iraq. With Order Number 13438, he granted power to the administration to freeze the assets of an abstract but broadly defined group of people who threatened the stability of Iraq. The list targeted anyone who has propagated violence in Iraq in an effort to destabilize the reconstruction. This is a bad thing because, as the Fifth Amendment illuminated, you simply cannot seize property without due process. This order doesn't just stay in Iraq, but could target war protesters in the United States. Executive orders, while not explicitly stated in the Constitution, are just a part of the way our government is run. Beginning with Washington, it has become a normality within our government. Only 2 presidents have never made use of executive orders: President Hayes and President Garfield. President Hayes recognized that executive power is large because it is not defined in the Constitution, took the view that consensus presidents had acted within a limited range under an unwritten law of usage that has come to regulate an average presidential administration. But these are just irregularities. No matter what president is in power and what time we are in, we expect that the president to issue executive orders.